Okay, we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the Rev-Trac Customer Spotlight with the City of San Diego. My name is Charlie Kelly. I'm a regional manager with Rev-Trac, and I'm going to be doing the introductions to the presenters today. We also want to let you know that this is going to be recorded, and an email will be sent out with a link to the recording. If you also want the slides, we can certainly provide that. If you would like, just let us know. Okay, so the introductions here, we have Stephen Gild, who's the SAP Development Manager at the City of San Diego. He'll be doing the majority of the presentation. City of San Diego has been using Rev-Trac since 2016. I've been dealing with Stephen since 2015. He's actually going to tell about his journey with Rev-Trac from the beginning to now. And once he is done, we're going to turn it over to Dan McGran, who's our Rev-Trac Sales Director globally, and he will finish that up. If you have questions, certainly put them in the chat, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. Dan will be probably handling some of that, but without further ado, we're just going to send it over to Stephen right now so we can get right into the meat of this. Stephen, over to you now.
Thanks, Charlie. So for those, I joined the city in 2016, and at that time I was a consultant, and one of the first things that we looked at the City of San Diego was they put our BW system on HANA, and when they did that, they created N+1 landscape for the city. And when we introduced an N+1 landscape, then we were having changes flow into most of our systems from both a project landscape, which is our N+1, and our production support, which is our N landscape. And we had to be able to keep these two systems in sync with all the changes that we're making at the City of San Diego. We also required email approvals for any changes to go into our production systems, and this could have been a wet signature on a functional technical spec, or it could have been just an email confirmation from an end user saying, yes, I approve this to go into production. And it just wasn't really efficient. Our change control process was lengthy, and we used a whole lot of spreadsheets, which wasn't really accurate all the time. It's an issue because of what I just mentioned, that our change control process was inefficient. We had documents that were in SharePoint. We weren't sure if we had all the right documentation for each of our changes. Numerous times we had missed transports because either the developer or the functional person forgot to include a transport in one of the spreadsheets. And so we would move everything into production only to find out that a transport was missing. So it didn't look good for our ERP team with the business, because the business would expect a change to be in on time, and it just wasn't happening. And we also didn't have any kind of historical information about our changes outside of manually updating spreadsheets. And we were kind of concerned about going into an audit and how auditors would think about that, and it wasn't going to be good. So, next slide, Charlie. So how did Rev-Trac help us? Well, we were looking to build basically a better mousetrap, is how I like to look at it. I've been doing SAP for, I don't even like to say it, over 30 years now. And we have now at the city 16 different development systems across our landscape. And we really needed to be able to keep our two systems in sync at all times so we could do project work as well as production support work. And we also had to be able to identify when an object was being modified in one of the landscapes and also trying to be modified in the other landscape. And I don't know of any other way to do that without using Rev-Trac and their OOPS capability, but it does tell you that if you have changes in the other landscape, that you could run into conflicts in the future. And we also liked Rev-Trac because of the transport visibility to all of our SAP systems at the city. So it wasn't just a matter of asking Basis to give us a list of transports. We could actually use Rev-Trac to go in and see all the transports that were being created. Like I mentioned, I joined in 2016. Prior to that, I was on the road for 5 years. And one of the clients that I worked at, they had implemented SAP Charm solution. And I was doing development work back then, and I didn't really find Charm very useful as far as a developer goes. It was complex. When I spoke to the client about how long it took them to implement Charm at their location, it took almost 2 years to get Soulman just right so they could use Charm. When Soulman went from 7.1 to 7.2, there were a lot of challenges just doing that upgrade with Solution Manager. And so then I reached out to one of the people that used to work at the city and asked him if he had known of any software that could help us do this. And he mentioned Rev-Trac to me. So then I got on the interweb and checked around and found Rev-Trac. So next slide, Charlie. When I found Rev-Trac, it was a pretty easy conversation to have with Charlie. I believe is the first one I spoke to there. And of course, when we implement new software at the city, we always have to make sure that we're getting the best price. We go through what's called an RFP process. And if we do go through an RFP process, then we have to have competitors submit their requests for proposals to have the city implement their software. But we also had another vehicle called a sole source. And as long as the cost of what you were implementing was under X number of dollars, you didn't have to actually go out and do an RFP. So we did a sole source, and yeah, see on the slide, Charlie. And so we did do a demo with both Rev-Trac and Rev-Trac, and it was really apparent how easily the Rev-Trac solution was, and it basically gave me everything I wanted. Just in the demo itself, I was really in awe about how easy it was to use that and how it could do the oops checks between the two systems. And the pricing was perfect as far as not having to go out with an RFP. We could do a sole source and actually implement this. So after the demo, we did a POC, and that probably took, I would say, a month. And that, well, it was a couple of weeks, but it was mostly dragging on my side. But we did get a POC up and running using our Solution Manager development system, along with a couple of our sandbox systems. And again, I was really shocked how easy it was to configure that. And I'm not a basis guy, I'm a software development manager, but the basis team helped me set up some RFC calls. And other than that, it was really me that configured this. So it's a very easy tool for just about anyone to configure and use, as long as you know the details about transports and how you want them to move through your landscape. All the basis stuff is handled under the covers by the software. You don't have to worry about that stuff. And since we had the successful POC, we went ahead and procured Rev-Trac. Next slide, Charlie. Okay, so the implementation process. This again was a shocker to me. When you sign a contract with Rev-Trac, they give you, I believe it was 2 weeks of consulting fees to have somebody come out and help you configure it. And so one of the Rev-Trac consultants came on site, and we basically had our systems all configured in those 2 weeks. So I'm guessing, if I go back and think, it was probably a 3-week contract where we could use somebody for 3 weeks, and we only needed them for 2 of the weeks, which was really amazing. We did get some assistance from our basis team to help set up some of the security authorizations, RFCs, like I mentioned, but pretty much to set up all of our projects, our request types, our strategies, our migrations, that was all done by me and the Rev-Trac consultant that came out and worked on site with me. And within those 2 weeks, we had a system that was up and running. It was just really phenomenal. And as I was playing with it, making sure that I had all the systems in there, Rev-Trac uses a case system that you can basically log into their website and enter a case, whether it be a question, an issue, or a problem. And I have never worked with a vendor that responds as quickly as Rev-Trac does to me. Usually if I enter a case in the morning, I'll have a response within a couple of hours. Because it's Australian based, sometimes I'll even enter one on Friday and I'll have my solution or the answer to my question by Monday morning when I'm back at the office. So they've been an awesome company to work for. They really take care of their customers, and yeah, they just take care of us. It's really good. Next slide, please. So what are some of the benefits that we experienced? To me, the biggest one is we don't miss any transports anymore. Ever since we started using Rev-Trac, every transport is accounted for. There's an enforcement that you can set on your development system, so you can't create a transport unless you associate it with an RTR. And that was beautiful, because since we've implemented Rev-Trac, we've never missed a transport going into production. We've never overwritten any new change with an older change, and that's the oops checking that is embedded within the Rev-Trac solution. It will go out and it will check to see if you have that object locked in another transport RTR, and it will warn you. It'll give you either an overwrite or an overtake message, and they give you all the details about that so you can do the research and know if that's okay to do or if it's not okay to do. Our change control meetings went from probably running an hour to an hour and a half to where we can go through, I would say, 20 change requests in probably about 30 minutes now. And we typically average about 10 changes per week at the city. The other thing that Rev-Trac allows us to do now is also work on projects and production support at the same time. We have Ariba, and we also have our EAM systems that use our project landscape more than our production support landscape, because their projects take quite a long time to implement. But using Rev-Trac, we can still do our production support in the other landscape, move those changes over on a weekly basis, and then our projects are testing with the latest and greatest software and changes. It also helped us simplify our QAS refresh process. So after we refresh one of our QAS systems from production, Rev-Trac has reports that will tell you chronologically what transports went into that system at what time, so then you can backfill any changes that made it to queue but had not yet made it into production. Because obviously when you backfill into a QAS system, you're going to lose all those changes because they're not in production yet. So Rev-Trac gave us the tool to basically get our QAS systems back at the level they needed to be at. As far as the reporting that they offer, it's so nice to be able to go into Rev-Trac, and within 5 minutes, I can give pretty much any kind of report that my boss asks me for with regards to changes in our system. And this includes all of our systems from ISPS, ISU, CRM, BobJ, GRC, just all the way across. The reporting is phenomenal. And then also being able to test our project work, because it includes all the up-to-date changes that were introduced in the other landscape, as I mentioned before. And I think the team's ability to implement project works quicker comes with more confidence now, because they know when they're working on a project, they have all the code they need, and there won't be any mystery when we go into production on how it's going to behave there. And I think the other one is the ability to have a different approval process for the type of changes that we're working on. With our development strategy, we do code reviews, and we're also integrating with Onapsis now to do code scans and transport scans. Our security RTRs go through an internal control review. So within that workflow, we actually send an email to our internal control department, and then they validate our security change before it moves to the next step. So it's really nice to be able to have different strategies, different workflows for the different type of changes that we have at the city. Next slide. Charlie, you want to go to the next slide? Okay. How did it change your processes? So we went from a very manual spreadsheet, what signatures, to a fully automated process. We removed the need for any email approvals from our BPCs, which are business process coordinators. or our stakeholders. They can actually go into Rev-Trac and click a box that says they approve. We don't need an email confirmation anymore. We've improved our delivery of both our production support and project changes because all the transports are all accounted for. It did make our developers and configurators more efficient in getting the changes moved through our landscape because they can determine when they want to migrate a change into the QAS system. We don't have to rely on a 15-minute clock running in Basis or ping the Basis team to move a transport for us. We can actually do that now using Rev-Trac. And in 2022, the ERP's team, we were audited by our Information Technology General Controls, which they call the ITGC. And basically we passed the audit with flying colors, and I think a lot of that was due to the Rev-Trac reports that I was able to generate. We do actually track even job changes now in Rev-Trac, and that was one of the questions that came up is we use BMC software to run our jobs, and the audit committee was really wondering how we got those changes through, and did we track those in Rev-Trac? And we did, and I was able to generate a port for them and show them all of the job changes we had made in that year of 2022. All right, Charlie, next slide. So ROI, I'm really not much of a numbers guy here, but I do know that our basis resources cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $275,000 a year. And without using Rev-Trac, if we had to rely 100% on basis, it would take at minimum at least one full-time basis person just to help us keep our landscapes in sync, to keep the changes moving from dev to queue to project. That whole thing that basis would do in a system that you don't have an automated change process like Rev-Trac. So I think that Rev-Trac more than paid for itself in less than a year. And it's been phenomenal. I still maybe use about a quarter of a basis resource to help me, but for the most part, I can do this by myself. I don't have to have any other support with that. And then in 2021, our CIO, who used to be a basis manager back in the day, this is a quote or something I took out of one of his documents that he had sent out, that Rev-Trac has been fully integrated into the city's SAP environment and SAP change control procedures. To date, almost 3,000 SAP changes have been processed utilizing Rev-Trac. The city's current Rev-Trac instances contain 5 years of city-specific SAP system change history with its proprietary software. This change history is critical for system maintenance and allows for the comparison of current components to past configurations to facilitate feasible analysis and other necessary technical evaluations. It would produce no advantage and therefore would be undesirable to solicit alternatives to a solution already well integrated. So this came up because our contract was going to expire with Rev-Trac and we were going to renew it, and we didn't want to go out to an RFP process and lose everything that we've done for the last 5 years with Rev-Trac. So to me, this spoke volumes about how good Rev-Trac has benefited at the city. All right, next slide, Charlie. Okay, how quickly have you received business value? I saw business value immediately as soon as we turned it on. I'm sure there was some questions by some developers, some consultants about, what enforcement meant, what the OOPS checks meant. But I saw benefits immediately because we were tracking everything now and everything was transparent to everybody. We did use Rev-Trac when we migrated off of our SQL database onto the HANA database, and it really made that simple. It just took all the guesswork out of it. The second implementation is when we did our enterprise asset management go live, and that was for 4 different departments within the city. And again, it was Deloitte Consulting that helped us do that, and they had consultants all over the place. And some of them I only knew their names. I never even met the people, but we basically kept that all under control using Rev-Trac. It wasn't a management nightmare to keep our production support going, as well as letting Deloitte run a project for us in our project landscape. And so we're still receiving business value from Rev-Trac. As I mentioned just a couple minutes ago, is we did buy software from Onapsis that used to be Virtual Forage, and they have a code profiler and a transport profiler tool set that we've now integrated into Rev-Trac. So in our workflow process, we can actually scan our code and we can scan the transports to make sure there's not going to be any issues when those transports go into the next system. And it was fairly straightforward on how to build those hooks into Rev-Trac and actually use Rev-Trac and Onapsis for the same type of solution. And it's been phenomenal. Next slide.
I think that was.
And I'm going to turn it back over to Dan now, and Dan's going to talk about this slide.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
Dan,
thanks.
over to you.
All right, can you hear me okay? I'm coming through?
Yep,
Good.
you're fine.
All right, Stephen, thank you very much. And Charlie also, we're not on camera, but everyone would see me blushing from all the kind words Stephen was saying about Rev-Trac. That was very much appreciated, and we appreciate the city of San Diego as a customer and Stephen as a friend here as well. So as Stephen was saying, Rev-Trac controls through workflows from end to end, from the initial need to a change through the testing and documentation steps all the way into production. And what we're showing on this rather busy diagram here is a simplified version of an SAP environment, right? Where you have the dev system, the quality system, and the prod system sort of in there in the middle, representing the most basic SAP environment. As you heard Stephen say today, they have an N+1, so they have a secondary dev and a secondary quality across multiple SAP landscapes. So Rev-Trac can handle those larger environments, but this is just to keep it rather simple, a simple depiction of the left to right transport management process and change management process that Rev-Trac controls. And those little clipboards that you see in the middle of this are just example approval steps, right? So requiring some upfront documentation and code review and impact analysis and so on and so forth, progressing left to right. The thing with Rev-Trac is the first step is always Rev-Trac is in a new state, and the final state is it's always in a complete state. But these other steps in between are completely up to the customer, and that's what we help them configure. And most customers would have multiple workflows, right? Stephen was mentioning that they have a slightly different one for their security type of changes versus their normal CAB approved weekly changes versus perhaps some other types of changes that they've adjusted the workflows for so that they get precisely what they need to manage the different types of changes that are going across the environments. So Rev-Trac is in the middle there. And then what we're showing with all these other logos or trying to depict here is the integrations that we offer to customers that Stephen briefly mentioned with the integration they have with Onapsis, which is a code checking and transport checking solution. You can sort of see that under the code review thing in sort of the lower left part of this diagram. But that's just one area that we can integrate with. We have other customers that have integrated Rev-Trac with their ITSM solutions, right? Their IT service management solutions, such as ServiceNow or BMC or Sharewell that you see up there. Others that have integrated with Jira or Azure DevOps for the Agile project management solutions, because to get a DevOps or a DevSecOps tool chain from end to end, you're most likely going to have other tools that are involved in the process. And through our bi-directional REST API integrations that Rev-Trac includes with our software, you get the ability to integrate with these other solutions, whether it's the testing solutions and the impact analysis or the other ones I've mentioned already. So you can really build out a highly automated, fairly simplified and enforceable workflow. Enforceable sometimes might have a negative connotation or a negative meaning to some people, but you really do have to control the way your transports move through your landscapes. And if you're enforcing everything to Rev-Trac, and if Rev-Trac is helping to make that a simplified and easy to use process, especially with these integrations where we just pass the information on to the various tools, get the results back automatically in Rev-Trac, we end up actually saving the user steps along the way and making sure that they don't skip a step. So that's some of the key benefits that we're seeing customers achieve when they decide to integrate with some other applications that they have to put this type of full DevSecOps toolchain type together. So just wanted to take a few minutes there on that. One other thing to mention is, again, we very much appreciate Stephen here today, sharing with us his experiences with Rev-Trac. We have other customers as well that have shared some of their experiences. There's 2 sites out there. Maybe some of you are familiar with the G2 site, a Gartner software review site. So it's just the letter G and the number 2. If you go on there, you can search for Rev-Trac and see some reviews. If there are any customers on today's call, because I know we end up having customers on the webinars pretty often, we'd ask you if you have anything you wanted to share with others about your experiences with Rev-Trac to go out to the G2 site and do that. I believe there's a gift card available for validated reviews for that. And then in addition to the G2 website, there's one called Tech Validate. I'm sorry, I'm not sharing them today, but it's just TECH and Validate, all one word. It's a survey site. And we had interviewed our customers for the past few years, and we have lots of charts and graphs and testimonials and short success stories out there as well. So we'd be happy to have you. That would be a good place to start if you're interested in more information about Rev-Trac, as well as our website as well, which is just rev-trac.com. So with that, I think we were going to proceed to some of the Q&A sessions, which I'm going to try and bring up here. And we did get a bunch of them, Charlie. I'm able to access them. So I'll just start going through them from top to bottom, and you can either leave it on this slide or go to the final slide, either one, which is just I think Stephen's contact information. The first one I see here is, does Rev-Trac work with EpiUse Labs tools? Okay, so EpiUse Labs, I am familiar with them, with some of their tools. I can't remember exactly what they do off the top of my head, but we have worked with some customers that have used EpiUse and Rev-Trac and had figured out how to make them work together, right? I wouldn't say that there's a out-of-the-box integration with them, but since EpiUse is primarily an ABAP-based tool and Rev-Trac is an ABAP-based tool as well, there are ways that we can easily have them communicate with each other and build some workflows that would use both solutions to do what you're trying to accomplish in your end-to-end transport management workflow. Okay, so that was EpiUse. Next question is, can Rev-Trac support hybrid SAP landscapes? Example, SAP S/4HANA on-premise and BTP on SAP public cloud. Okay, that's a good one. And the answer for Rev-Trac and supporting different SAP environments, whether they're on-prem, cloud, public cloud, private cloud, is that Rev-Trac can support all SAP environments except SAP's pure public cloud, S/4HANA. I'm not going to take a guess at what it's named this week from SAP because they change it all the time, but that's the multi-tenant S/4HANA public cloud offering from SAP, which tends to be at the aim towards the smaller type of customers with maybe 50, 100 SAP type users and those types of things, whereas our software has traditionally worked with the medium and larger SAP environments. So yes, we can support SAP cloud solutions in many ways. The only one we cannot is the multi-tenant version of SAP S/4HANA public cloud. Can you elaborate on migration to S/4HANA? Thank you, is the question. Now, City of San Diego did not move to S/4HANA. That's correct, Stephen, right? You're on still on Business Suite. That's correct.
That's correct. We're just on the HANA database.
Right, the HANA database. So what you were specifically talking about was doing the SQL to HANA database conversion and having Rev-Trac use that. So, but Rev-Trac works. So taking the City of San Diego out of the picture here in this answer is we have many customers that are running Rev-Trac with their S/4HANA environments and many customers that are sort of in between, right, where they're running Rev-Trac on their ECC environment or R3, whatever we want to call it, and their S4 at the same time. And then even a few customers that are running those projects for an extended period of time, talking 12, 18, 24 plus months, because they are very, very large global companies, some of the biggest in the world, and they would be running in parallel. And we also have solutions where we can help with that. I don't want to go too much into detail here, but we'd be happy to follow up with you on that. One of the integrations that we can work with is for code remediation. When you are moving your code from ECC to S/4HANA, it has to be adapted or remediated. So we work, for example, with SmartShift to help automate some of those processes. That's another integration that we weren't showing on the previous screen. So that's probably not a lot of elaboration on S/4HANA, but key things to remember quickly is Rev-Trac works with S/4HANA as well as ECC at the same time, and can support customers that are transitioning from one to the other, I guess is the best way. We have a question here this is an easy one, is Rev-Trac SAP certified? And yes, we've had certifications for 20 plus years. We hadn't mentioned this earlier, but Rev-Trac has been in the SAP space and been an SAP partner since the late 90s, and roughly about 200 customers around the world, again, from the small and medium-sized customers all the way up to some of the largest in the world, such as Intel and Apple and others. But we are certified on both ECC and S/4HANA. There was a question about BTP that I missed earlier, and we do support BTP with Rev-Trac, so I wanted to make sure I covered that one. Does Rev-Trac provide upgrades for every SAP upgrade? If I'm understanding that question correctly, Rev-Trac does not depend on the underlying SAP version, right? So it works across versions. In fact, it's the same Rev-Trac that goes into ECC, that goes into S4, completely different code bases from SAP. So you don't have to worry about changing Rev-Trac when you do an SAP upgrade. There are some things, we have a quick sheet to show customers what they need to do technically when they are upgrading their SAP environments. You'd want to disable some parts of Rev-Trac for a short period of time and those types of things, but that's all handled through our support services. So customers don't have to worry about upgrading Rev-Trac every time they upgrade SAP. It works across many different versions simultaneously in customer environments. And then as far as Rev-Trac upgrades go, that's up to the customer, right? We encourage customers to upgrade to the latest versions, but we don't force them to. Can we attach documents to Rev-Trac? For example, UAT results, unit test results. Yes, absolutely, right? So we can support two ways to associate documents or links to Rev-Trac, and we have an attachments option within our interface where you can upload a Word document or a PDF or screenshots or whatever your testing evidence might be, or you could actually use a reference, is what we call it in Rev-Trac, which would be a link to something else, maybe a link to a SharePoint site where you store these things, or a link to a document management system, to a Solman repository, or things like that. So certainly you can attach documents to the Rev-Trac, and we can even enforce that if you choose to. So you can create a very basic rule. It takes about 2 minutes to set up in Rev-Trac, and say that you cannot move forward in the next step in Rev-Trac unless this type of document is attached to the Rev-Trac. So you can make sure that the users are following the right process before they get to the next step in the Rev-Trac process. Is Rev-Trac on-premise? Another sort of one of these cloud questions, and the correct answer is yes. Rev-Trac would be considered an on-premise solution. It is not a SaaS, a software as a service solution, but it gets a little tricky there, because even though Rev-Trac is on-premise, it can operate in SAP Rise and SAP HEC, in Azure, in AWS, and Google Cloud Platform, wherever customers have those SAP environments, Rev-Trac can go there. So, but we are delivered as an on-premise solution. There's a question here about licensing and implementation costs. Certainly can't get into that here, but we license based on the number of dev systems, and then the implementation typically varies between 2 and 4 weeks. Stephen said it was about 3 weeks, I think he said, for City of San Diego. So we'd be happy to take that offline, but it's, it ranges from about $30,000 a year subscription basis for the biggest customers in the world, the Saudi Aramcos and things like that, you can imagine it's about 5 times that, 5 or 6 times that for the biggest ones. But so 30 to 150 would be the average there. And Stephen was comparing that to costs of an FTE basis resource, and that's quickly how you can start seeing some ROI there. Last couple questions here. We had a bunch. How long does it take for you to certify the next available version of S/4HANA? Okay, that's good. Good question. We're normally about 6 months or so behind. So if S/4HANA, what's the current version? 10.22 or 22.10? I forget how to name it these days. I think it's 10.22. We are already certified on that. But in general, we have a commitment, I believe, in our contracts to have within 6 months of the next version, and that fits in line because most customers are not running to upgrade to the latest S/4HANA version as soon as it's out, right? There's always a bit of a delay there, so we're always staying in step with the timings for our customers. Last question I had here is, do you have product support 24/7? So is it available around the world? And we do. We do have a critical case that you can create for customers through the support desk, and there's also a phone number that customers can call when there's some major issue, like you can't move transports into production, and that's what Rev-Trac, that's what the tool does. So those types of situations, you can call a number, you get a call back within a relatively short amount of time. I believe the SLA is 1 or 2 hours. I'd have to check the contracts. And then you're put in touch with an on-call Rev-Trac senior support engineer to help you with whatever situation you might be experiencing. So we do have round-the-clock support for those critical situations. So there we are. That was about 7 or 8 questions, which we appreciate from the audience. With that, I think we will be wrapping things up. I wanted to take a moment again to thank Charlie for the introductions, and very much thank Stephen for the content today. Can't say thank you enough there, Stephen. And with that, we'll just everyone will get a link to the recordings. The slides would be available. Just email us. I believe most of you know how to get in contact with us, or you can just go to info@Rev-Trac and request it. With that, and Stephen, if Charlie, if you had any things to wrap up with, otherwise we'll just end the webinar and let everyone else back to their day.
No, it's a pleasure, Dan. I'm glad it could help.
Okay, yeah. Yep, pleasure was ours. Okay, thanks everyone. We will end the webinar and say thank you everyone for attending. Take care now. Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.